The blue shoe lay abandoned on the hiking trail, a child's size 6 with frayed laces and a smudge of dirt on the heel. Park Ranger Olivia Reeves stared at it, her stomach twisting into a knot of dread as the summer wind whispered through the pine trees of Blackwater National Forest. The search party had been combing the woods for 17 hours now, their flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness like desperate prayers. But 6-year-old Ethan Miller remained missing, vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine family camping trip. How could a child simply disappear in broad daylight, surrounded by family, with dozens of other campers nearby? What evil could be lurking in these familiar woods that Olivia had patrolled for over a decade, knowing every trail and hollow as intimately as the lines on her own palm? If you're new here, please subscribe to the Lost and the Found channel, where we share stories that will break your heart and then piece it back together in unexpected ways. Stay with me until the end to truly understand the depths of this story and the profound ways that loss can transform us all. Olivia picked up the small shoe, handling it with a reverence that belied its ordinary appearance. The boy's mother had described it earlier in a voice that cracked with desperation: blue sneakers with dinosaur prints on the insoles, his favorites, the ones he insisted on wearing despite having nearly outgrown them. Olivia slipped the shoe into an evidence bag, her hand steady despite the tremor in her heart. This was the first tangible clue they'd found since Ethan's disappearance, and it was both promise and heartbreak wrapped in canvas and rubber. "Over here," she called to the search team spread out among the trees. "I've found something." As the team converged on her location, Olivia's mind raced through the facts of the case. The Millers had arrived at Blackwater 3 days ago: Mother Rebecca, Father David, and their only son Ethan. Yesterday morning, they'd set out on the Pinecrest Trail, a relatively easy 4-mile loop popular with families. According to the parents, Ethan had been walking between them one moment, then gone the next when Rebecca turned to offer him a granola bar. The entire area had been searched repeatedly: no additional footprints, no sign of struggle, no screams heard by nearby hikers. Just a little boy there 1 second and gone the next, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Chief Ranger Marcus Blackwell, a barrel-chested man with silver-streaked hair and 30 years of search and rescue experience, knelt beside Olivia, his face grim in the fading light. "Good find, Reeves," he said, examining the evidence bag. "Where exactly was it?" "Just off the main trail," Olivia pointed to a small clearing a few feet away. "It wasn't there during our sweep this morning. Someone placed it here recently. Or the boy was moved through here recently," Blackwell muttered, standing up with a groan that spoke of aging knees and too many searches with unhappy endings. The unspoken hung between them: after 18 hours, they were no longer likely searching for a lost child who had wandered off. Either someone had taken Ethan Miller, or they were looking for a body. A radio crackled at Blackwell's hip. "Chief, the parents are asking for an update." Blackwell sighed, the weight of responsibility evident in the slump of his broad shoulders. "I'll talk to them. Reeves, you take Johnson and Martinez and keep working this area. If the shoe is here, there might be more." Olivia nodded, already scanning the terrain with her flashlight. As Blackwell walked away, she fought to maintain her professional demeanor. After 12 years as a park ranger, she'd participated in dozens of searches, but something about this one cut deeper, worming its way under her skin in a manner she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way Rebecca Miller had clutched her arm that morning, her nails leaving half-moon impressions in Olivia's flesh, as she whispered, "Please find my baby. He's afraid of the dark." Or maybe it was the photograph the father had provided. Ethan grinning with a missing front tooth, his eyes bright with the particular joy that belongs only to children who have never known true fear. "Spread out," Olivia instructed her team, 10-foot intervals. "Check every hollow, every crevice. This shoe didn't walk here by itself." As darkness fully enveloped the forest, transforming familiar trails into alien landscapes of shadow and suggestion, Olivia steeled herself for a long night. The forest held its secrets close, but she was determined to uncover them, one careful step at a time. Somewhere in these woods, a little boy was waiting to be found, and Olivia refused to let this search end with another name added to the list of the forest's permanent missing. The beam of her flashlight caught a glint of something metallic nestled among fallen pine needles. Olivia approached cautiously, her heart rate accelerating. There, partially concealed by forest debris, lay a small dinosaur figurine, its paint chipped from being carried in small hands and pockets. According to Rebecca Miller's tearful inventory of the possessions Ethan had with him, he'd been carrying a collection of miniature dinosaurs in his backpack. "I've got something else," Olivia called out, crouching to examine the toy without touching it. It wasn't just any dinosaur, it was a triceratops, deliberately placed upright, facing east toward a game trail that branched off from the main path, a trail that had already been searched multiple times throughout the day. A cold certainty settled in Olivia's stomach. These items weren't being accidentally dropped, they were being placed. Someone was leading them deeper into the forest, away from the populated campgrounds and into the remote wilderness of Blackwater's least accessible regions. The question that haunted her as she marked the location and photographed the evidence was simple and terrifying. Were they being led toward Ethan Miller, or away from him? And why did she have the unsettling feeling that whatever waited at the end of this macabre treasure hunt was something far more complicated than a lost child? Chapter 2. The Watcher's Rebecca Miller's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Seated on a metal folding chair in the Blackwater Forest Ranger Station, she clutched a paper cup of lukewarm coffee that had been pressed into her palm hours ago by a well-meaning volunteer. The liquid had long since cooled, untouched, much like the sandwich that sat on a paper plate beside her. 36 hours had passed since Ethan disappeared, and Rebecca couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten or truly slept. David paced the length of the small room, 5 steps in one direction before turning sharply and retracing his path. The repetitive movement should have irritated her, but Rebecca found herself counting his steps, finding odd comfort in their predictability. 5 steps, turn, 5 steps, turn, a rhythm to cling to when everything else had dissolved into chaos. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Chief Ranger Blackwell, entered the room, followed by Olivia Reeves and a man in the tan uniform of the county sheriff's department. "This is Detective Aaron Winters. He's going to be coordinating with us on the investigation." Investigation, not search. The subtle shift in terminology wasn't lost on Rebecca. The authorities were no longer operating under the assumption that Ethan had simply wandered off trail. Her throat constricted, making it difficult to breathe. "We found a few items that we believe belonged to Ethan," Olivia said gently, placing evidence bags on the table. "Can you confirm these are his?" Rebecca stared at the blue sneaker and the Triceratops figurine, nodding mutely. David stopped his pacing abruptly, crossing the room in 2 quick strides to examine the items more closely. "Where?" he demanded, his voice hoarse from hours of calling his son's name into the unresponsive forest. "Where did you find these?" "About half a mile from where he was last seen," Blackwell answered. "Off the main trail. That doesn't make sense." David ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We've told you Ethan knows not to leave the trail. We've drilled that into him since he could walk." Detective Winters, a lean man with observant eyes and a carefully neutral expression, pulled out a chair and sat across from Rebecca. "Mrs. Miller, I need to ask you some questions that may seem repetitive, but they're important. Can you walk me through exactly what happened yesterday morning, from the moment you woke up until the moment you realized Ethan was missing?" Rebecca closed her eyes, forcing herself back to yesterday, though it already felt like a lifetime ago. She described their morning in painstaking detail. Ethan's excitement over spotting a deer near their campsite at dawn, his insistence on wearing his dinosaur shirt for the hike, the way he'd skipped ahead on the trail, stopping to examine interesting rocks and bugs, always maintaining line of sight with his parents. And then her voice faltered. "I reached into my backpack for his snack. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, maybe 15 at most. When I looked up he was gone." The memory hit her with physical force. That moment of confusion before panic, the split second where the world still made sense before it shattered irreparably. Winters nodded, making notes in a small notebook. "And you didn't hear anything? No voices, no sounds of struggle, nothing?" David answered, resuming his pacing. It was as if he'd been plucked from the trail by, he couldn't finish the sentence, the possibilities too terrible to voice aloud. "The items we found," Olivia interjected, her tone gentle but firm, "appear to have been deliberately placed, not dropped accidentally." Rebecca's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" We're not entirely sure, Blackwell admitted, but we're expanding the search area in that direction. We have additional teams arriving from neighboring counties, and the state police are sending a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment for an aerial survey at first light. Detective Winters leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. I need to ask you both a difficult question. Is there anyone who might want to harm your family, or specifically, who might target Ethan? The implication landed like a physical blow. Rebecca felt the room tilt slightly, nausea rising in her throat. No, she whispered. Everyone loves Ethan. He's just a little boy. What about your work, Mr. Miller? Winters turned to David. I understand you're an environmental attorney. Have you received any threats recently? Made any enemies through your cases? David stopped pacing, his face darkening. I represent corporate clients in regulatory compliance matters. It's hardly controversial work, and even if it were, what kind of monster targets a child to get to a parent? The kind that exists in nightmares, Rebecca thought, her mind conjuring images too terrible to dwell on. The kind that steals children from hiking trails on sunny mornings and leaves their shoes as breadcrumbs in a twisted fairy tale. We have to consider all possibilities, Winters said evenly, including that Ethan's disappearance might be targeted rather than random. It helps us allocate resources appropriately. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young ranger stuck his head in, beckoning urgently to Blackwell. The chief excused himself, stepping outside for a brief, murmured conversation before returning, his expression unreadable. They've found another item, he announced. About a quarter-mile further along the game trail from where we found the shoe. It's Ethan's backpack. Hope and dread surged simultaneously in Rebecca's chest. Is there any sign of him? Was there anything in the backpack? Blackwell hesitated. The backpack was empty except for a note. A note, David stepped forward. What did it say? He's watching, Blackwell quoted grimly. He's always been watching. Rebecca's coffee cup slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, spilling across the linoleum floor like dark blood. The room fell silent, except for the slow, rhythmic drip as coffee pooled beneath her chair. In that moment, Rebecca knew with terrible certainty that her son's disappearance was something far more sinister than a child wandering off trail. Someone had taken her baby. Someone who had been watching, waiting, planning. And with this realization came another, more chilling thought. What if they had been watching not just Ethan, but all of them, for much longer than anyone realized? Miles away, deep in the remote northern section of Blackwater Forest, where the trees grew so densely that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor, a man knelt beside a small stream. The water ran clear and cold, bubbling over smooth stones worn by centuries of patient persistence. The man filled a canteen methodically, his movements economical and practiced. Behind him, partially concealed by a natural formation of rocks and thick underbrush, lay the entrance to a cave. From within came the soft, muffled sound of a child crying. The man capped the canteen and stood, turning toward the cave with a slight smile. "Don't worry," he murmured, though there was no one close enough to hear. "They're coming, just like I promised they would." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a child's watch with a cartoon character on its face, its strap broken as if torn from a small wrist in struggle or haste. Examining it thoughtfully, he nodded to himself before placing it carefully on a flat rock near the stream. Another breadcrumb for the trail. Another step in the game. It's time they remembered, he whispered to the forest. It's time they all remembered what they've tried so hard to forget. Chapter 3, The Darkness Within. As dawn broke over Blackwater Forest, Olivia Reeves stood at the edge of the command post, watching the organized chaos of a search operation that had now expanded to include over 100 personnel. State police moved efficiently among local rangers and volunteers, setting up additional equipment and coordinating search areas. A helicopter thundered overhead, beginning its thermal imaging sweep of the dense northern terrain. She hadn't slept. After finding Ethan's backpack with its ominous note, Olivia had joined teams searching through the night, pushing deeper into the forest along the emerging trail of deliberately placed items. The latest discovery, a child's digital watch with dinosaurs on the band, had been found just an hour ago, near a stream in the forest's northern quadrant, an area so remote that it was rarely visited even by experienced hikers. Reeves, Detective Winters approached, offering her a steaming cup of coffee. "You look like you could use this." Olivia accepted gratefully, taking a long sip before responding. "Thanks. Any updates from the lab?" "Preliminary results show no fingerprints on the note, or items other than the family's," Winters replied, his gaze following the helicopter's path across the forest canopy. "But they did find traces of a distinctive soil on the backpack that doesn't match the geology where it was found. They're analyzing it now." "Someone's playing with us," Olivia said quietly, "leading us like we're on some kind of twisted scavenger hunt." Winters nodded grimly. "The question is whether they're leading us toward the boy or just distracting us while they move him elsewhere, or worse." Olivia flinched at the implication. 48 hours was a critical threshold in missing persons cases, especially with children. They were approaching that deadline rapidly, each passing hour diminishing the likelihood of finding Ethan Miller alive. "There's something else," Winters continued, lowering his voice. "I ran background checks on the family. David Miller wasn't always an environmental compliance attorney. 7 years ago, he was a prosecutor specializing in crimes against children." Olivia's eyes widened. "He never mentioned that." "No, he didn't," Winters agreed. "And when I asked him about it directly, he got defensive, said it wasn't relevant, that he changed careers specifically to get away from the darkness of those cases." "You think this could be retribution, someone he prosecuted coming back for revenge?" "It's a theory worth exploring. I've requested files on all his old cases, focusing on perps who've been released in the last year." Olivia was about to respond when Chief Blackwell's voice crackled over her radio. "Reeves, get to the North Stream coordinate immediately. K-9 unit has a strong hit." She and Winters exchanged a brief look before breaking into a run toward the waiting ATVs. Within minutes, they were racing along Forest Service roads, cutting as close as possible to the coordinates, before continuing on foot through increasingly rugged terrain. The scene that greeted them at the stream was one of controlled urgency. The K-9 handler, a woman in state police uniform, stood with her Belgian Malinois, who was alert and focused, indicating strongly toward a rock formation on the far bank. "What have you got?" Olivia asked, slightly breathless from the rapid ascent. "Atlas picked up human scent concentrated around these rocks," the handler explained. "Fresh, within the last few hours. And there's this." She pointed to what appeared to be a natural crevice in the rock face, partially obscured by thick brush. On closer inspection, Olivia realized it was the entrance to a cave, narrow but navigable for an adult, or easily passable for a child. "Has anyone gone in?" Winters asked, already reaching for his flashlight. "Waiting for backup and proper equipment," Blackwell answered, emerging from the trees with 2 additional rangers. "These caves can go deep, with multiple chambers and passages. Easy to get lost if you don't know what you're doing." Olivia studied the cave entrance, noting disturbed vegetation and faint markings in the soft soil that could be footprints. "Someone's definitely been here recently," she confirmed. As the team prepared to enter the cave system, securing ropes and checking communications equipment, Olivia's radio crackled again. "Chief Blackwell," came the voice of a ranger back at command post. "We've got a situation here. The Millers are gone." "What do you mean gone?" Blackwell demanded. "They slipped away while the shift was changing, took their car." The volunteer who was with them said they received a text message, looked at it together, and immediately left. "Wouldn't say where they were going." Winters cursed under his breath, already pulling out his phone. "I'll try to track their cell phones. Something's not right." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Chief, I need to see that note again, the one from the backpack." Blackwell pulled up a digital photo on his phone and handed it to her. Olivia studied the message. "He's watching. He's always been watching," written in block letters with blue marker. There was something hauntingly familiar about the phrasing that nagged at her memory. "Detective," she said slowly, "you mentioned Miller worked child abuse cases. Were any of them here, in or around Blackwater?" Winters looked up from his phone. "Not that I've found, but my data's incomplete." "Why?" "Because this feels personal," Olivia replied. "Like someone who knows this forest well, who might have history here, and that note." She frowned, struggling to place the memory. "I've heard something like it before." A call from one of the rangers interrupted her thoughts. "We've got a clear passage into the cave system, and there are definite signs someone's been using it recently. The cave entrance opened into a narrow passage that descended steeply into the earth. Olivia led the way, her powerful flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed almost solid in its intensity. The air grew cooler and damper as they progressed, the sounds of their breathing and careful footsteps echoing strangely off the stone walls. After about 50 yards, the passage widened into a small chamber. Olivia's flashlight beam revealed clear evidence of recent human presence: a discarded water bottle, the remains of a small fire, and what appeared to be a makeshift sleeping area with blankets spread on the cave floor. "Someone's been living here," one of the rangers whispered unnecessarily. Winters knelt beside the sleeping area, examining the blankets without touching them. "Children's blankets," he noted grimly, "with dinosaur patterns." Olivia's radio chirped, the sound unnaturally loud in the cave's acoustic. "Reeves," came Blackwell's voice, distorted by interference. The techs identified that soil sample from the backpack. "It's a specific type of clay only found in the cave systems in northern Blackwater." "We're in the right place," Olivia confirmed, scanning the chamber methodically with her flashlight. The beam caught something scratched into the cave wall near the sleeping area. Moving closer, she saw crude childish letters spelling out a single word: "Help." Her heart contracted painfully. "Ethan's been here," she said. "Recently." The chamber had 3 additional passages leading deeper into the cave system. Atlas the canine indicated strongly toward the leftmost tunnel, his handler confirming the presence of human scent. "That way," she directed, and the team moved forward, tension radiating from each of them like heat. The passage narrowed again, forcing them to proceed single file, before opening suddenly into a much larger cavern. Olivia's flashlight couldn't penetrate fully to the far walls, suggesting significant size. The floor descended in a gentle slope to what sounded like running water, an underground stream. "Ethan," she called, her voice bouncing back in multiple echoes. "Ethan Miller, are you here?" "We're here to help you." Silence answered her, broken only by the soft gurgle of water. The team spread out cautiously, searching the perimeter of the cavern. It was Winters who found it first, a small alcove set into the far wall, concealed behind a natural pillar of stone. His sharp intake of breath drew Olivia's attention immediately. "What is it?" she asked, crossing the uneven ground quickly. Winters stood transfixed, his flashlight illuminating the alcove's interior. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, creating a disturbing collage that spoke of obsession and meticulous planning. There were dozens of photos of Ethan Miller playing at school, walking with his parents, riding his bike in what appeared to be his home driveway. Surveillance photos taken over what must have been months. But interspersed with these were older images, yellowed with age, of other children, and newspaper clippings with headlines that made Olivia's blood run cold. "Local child still missing after 3 weeks, search called off for missing hiker. 9 inches remains found in Blackwater Forest, identified as missing child." Olivia's flashlight beam landed on a particular photo that caused her breath to catch. An old Polaroid showed a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8, standing proudly next to a man in a ranger uniform at what was clearly Blackwater's main visitor center. She recognized the man immediately. Ranger Michael Shepard, a senior ranger who had trained her when she first joined Blackwater's team 12 years ago. Shepard had retired 8 years back, moving to Arizona to be closer to his daughter after his wife passed away, or at least, that was the story everyone knew. But it was the boy in the photo that truly captured her attention. Something about his smile, the way he stood, it nagged at her memory, a puzzle piece trying to connect. "Winters," she said quietly. "I need you to run a name Michael Shepard. Former senior ranger here at Blackwater." Winters was already photographing the disturbing display with his phone. "Connected to Miller's cases? I don't know yet," but a distant sound stopped her mid-sentence. A child's cry, faint but distinct, coming from deeper within the cave system. "Ethan," Olivia called, already moving toward the sound, her ranger training warring with the desperate impulse to run full speed into the unknown darkness. "Ethan, we're coming." The cry came again, clearer this time, emanating from a narrow passage at the cavern's far end. The team converged quickly, Atlas straining at his leash toward the sound. As they navigated the twisting passage, Olivia's radio crackled again. "Reeves, this is urgent," came Blackwell's voice, breaking through static. "We've ID'd a connection. Michael Shepard's son went missing in Blackwater 25 years ago. The case went cold, but the boy was never found. And guess who was the prosecutor who eventually shelved the case due to lack of evidence? David Miller." Olivia breathed, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Miller was just starting his career then, but yes. And here's the kicker. Shepard didn't retire to Arizona. He was institutionalized after a breakdown following his son's case closure. Released 14 months ago, with his current whereabouts unknown. The passage abruptly opened into another chamber, smaller than the previous one, but illuminated by the eerie glow of battery-powered lanterns. In the center stood a portable camp table with what appeared to be a ham radio set, and various papers spread across its surface, and there, huddled in the corner on a makeshift bed of blankets, was a small figure that could only be Ethan Miller. "Ethan," Olivia called softly, approaching slowly to avoid frightening the boy. "Ethan, we're here to help you. We're going to take you home." The child looked up, his face dirty and tear-streaked, but otherwise appearing physically unharmed. "He said you'd come," he whispered. "He said my parents would remember him now." "Where is he, Ethan?" Winters asked gently, scanning the chamber for additional passages or hiding places. "The man who brought you here? He left," Ethan answered, his voice small in the vast space. "He said he had to go meet my mom and dad. He said they were coming to the place where it happened." Olivia and Winters exchanged alarmed glances. "Ethan, what place? Where did he go to meet your parents?" Ethan's answer sent ice through Olivia's veins. "The old tower, where they forgot his little boy." Chapter 4. Buried Truths. The fire tower stood like a skeletal sentinel against the dawn sky, its weathered frame silhouetted by the first orange glow breaking over the eastern ridge of Blackwater Forest. Rebecca Miller climbed the metal stairs with her husband David close behind, each step bringing a hollow metallic echo that seemed to announce their approach to whatever or whoever waited at the top. The mysterious text message that had driven them from the ranger station in the middle of the night weighed like a stone in Rebecca's pocket. "I have your son. Come to the fire tower alone. Tell anyone and he dies. It's time to remember what happened at Widow's Creek." Widow's Creek, a name Rebecca hadn't heard in 20 years, a place she'd deliberately pushed from her memory. The fact that it appeared in this message, connected somehow to Ethan's disappearance, sent ice through her veins. When they reached the observation platform, the door to the small cabin stood ajar. Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she pushed it open, David's steadying presence at her back. The hinges creaked, announcing their arrival to the solitary figure who stood at the far window, gazing out over the vast expanse of forest now bathed in golden morning light. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," the man said, without turning. His voice was rough, as if unused to conversation, but there was something hauntingly familiar about its cadence. "Or that you'd bring the rangers despite my warning." "Where is my son?" David demanded, stepping forward protectively. The man turned then, and Rebecca fought to keep her expression neutral as recognition dawned. Michael Thorne had aged dramatically in the 20 years since she'd last seen him, his once black hair now silver, his face deeply lined by grief and bitterness, but his eyes remained the same, intense, intelligent, and now fixed on her with an unsettling combination of accusation and satisfaction. "He's safe," Thorne replied, his gaze never leaving Rebecca's face. "Unlike my daughter was." Rebecca felt the room tilt slightly, memories she'd deliberately buried for 2 decades suddenly surging to the surface. "Michael," she breathed, the name feeling strange on her lips after so long. "I don't understand. What does Lily have to do with Ethan?" "Everything," Thorne said simply, crossing to a desk where several manila folders lay neatly arranged. "And nothing. He's innocent in all this, just as she was. A child who trusted the adults around him to keep him safe." David looked between them, confusion evident. "Rebecca, who is this man?" "Michael Thorne," she replied, softly. "He was a forest ecologist who worked at Blackwater when I was a teenager. His daughter Lily was my friend. She drowned at Widow's Creek during a camping trip. We were 15. "She didn't drown," Thorne interrupted sharply. "She was murdered. And you know it, Rebecca. You've always known it." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as thunder before a storm. Rebecca felt her throat constrict, the careful walls she'd built around that summer beginning to crack. "That's not true," she managed. "It was an accident, a terrible accident." Thorne laughed, a hollow, painful sound devoid of humor. "Is that what you've told yourself all these years? Is that how you've managed to sleep at night, knowing what really happened to my daughter?" David stepped forward, protective instincts flaring. "I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Thorne, but taking our son was the only way to make her face the truth." Thorne finished for him. "The truth she's been running from for 20 years while I've been living with it every day." He opened one of the folders, removing a faded photograph. 5 teenagers standing at the edge of a creek, arms around each other's shoulders, faces bright with youth and the particular invincibility that belongs only to those who haven't yet learned how fragile life truly is. Rebecca recognized herself immediately, a gangly 15-year-old with braces and sun-bleached hair, standing beside a beautiful dark-haired girl whose smile seemed to light the frame. "Lily," she whispered, unable to stop herself from reaching toward the photo. "Don't," Thorne warned, pulling it back. "You lost the right to mourn her when you lied about what happened that day." Rebecca felt something inside her crumble, a foundation of denial, carefully constructed over 2 decades, suddenly insufficient against the weight of truth pressing down. "I was scared," she said, her voice barely audible. "We all were. We didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." David looked at his wife, bewilderment evident. "Rebecca, what is he talking about?" Thorne answered for her, his voice steady with the peculiar calm of a storm's eye. "Your wife and 4 other teenagers took my daughter to Widow's Creek for what they called an initiations into their summer group. They blindfolded her, made her stand on a rock in the middle of the creek, while they chanted some nonsense ritual they'd invented. But the rock was slippery, the current stronger than they expected. Lily fell, hit her head on a boulder." He paused, the pain of recounting still evident 20 years later. "Instead of getting help immediately, they panicked, argued about what to do, worried about getting in trouble. By the time they finally ran for help, it was too late." Rebecca closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as the memories she'd suppressed came flooding back. Lily's scream as she slipped, the terrible sound as her head struck stone, the frantic debate that followed as 5 terrified teenagers realized the magnitude of what had happened. "And then they lied," Thorne continued relentlessly. "Told the rangers they'd just been swimming, that Lily had gone under unexpectedly. No mention of the blindfold, the initiation, the precious minutes wasted arguing while she bled into the creek." David reached for Rebecca's hand, finding it cold and trembling. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "We were just kids," she whispered. "Stupid kids playing at being grown-up. We didn't think anyone would get hurt, and afterward, we were so scared of what would happen to us if people knew the truth. So my daughter became an accidental drowning statistic," Thorne said bitterly. "And you all went on with your lives as if nothing had happened. College, careers, families, all the things Lily never got to have." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant call of a hawk circling over the forest canopy. "Why now?" Rebecca finally asked, wiping tears from her face. "After all these years, why take Ethan to bring this back?" Thorne crossed to the window again, his silhouette stark against the morning light. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer, stage 4, inoperable. The doctors gave me 6 months at most." He turned back to face them, his expression softened slightly by weariness. "I realized I couldn't die with this truth still buried. Lily deserves better, and honestly, so do you, Rebecca." "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion momentarily overriding guilt. "Living with lies corrodes the soul," Thorne said simply. "I've watched you from a distance over the years, your career in victim advocacy, your charity work with at-risk youth. Good works, done perhaps to atone for something you've never properly faced." The insight struck Rebecca with physical force. How much of her adult life had been shaped by the unacknowledged weight of that summer day? How many of her choices had been unconscious attempts at redemption for a sin she'd never confessed? "Where is my son?" David asked again, his voice gentler now but still insistent. "In a cabin about half a mile from here," Thorne replied. "Unharmed, I promise you. I'm not a monster. I just needed to ensure you would listen, would finally face what happened. A noise from outside drew their attention, the distinctive whump-whump of helicopter blades, followed by the crackle of radio transmissions. The search teams had found them, despite their attempts at secrecy. "They'll arrest me," Thorne said, resignation in his voice. "I've made my peace with that, but before they do," he pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "I need you to tell the truth, Rebecca. All of it for Lily, for yourself, and for your son who deserves to know who his mother really is." Rebecca looked at the recorder, then at David, whose expression held not condemnation but compassion. The weight of 20 years of deception suddenly seemed unbearable, a burden she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "Okay," she whispered, reaching for the device with shaking fingers. As footsteps thundered on the metal stairs outside, Rebecca pressed the record button and began to speak, her voice growing steadier with each word, as she finally released the truth she'd held captive for half her life. Chapter 5. The light between shadows. Olivia Reeves stood at the edge of Widow's Creek, watching the specialized recovery team work in the clear, rushing water. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns that shifted and changed with the breeze, much like the case that had consumed the last 72 hours of her life. "They found something." Detective Winters approached, his expression grim, "under that large boulder where the current narrows." Olivia nodded, having expected as much after Rebecca Miller's recorded confession. The investigation had shifted dramatically since Ethan Miller had been recovered safely from Thorne's cabin, from a kidnapping case to the reopening of a 20-year-old death initially ruled accidental. "The forensic team thinks they can recover trace evidence even after all this time," Winters continued. "Something about the mineral content of the water and the sediment patterns." "And the blindfold?" Olivia asked. "Any sign of it?" "Not yet, but they're expanding the search area downstream." He paused, glancing at his notebook. "I've been interviewing the others named in Mrs. Miller's confession. 3 have corroborated her account, more or less. 1 is still unreachable, Jason Harmon, apparently traveling in Europe." Olivia watched as a diver emerged from the creek, carefully carrying a sealed evidence container. "After 20 years, what exactly are we hoping to find here?" "Confirmation," Winters replied simply. "Closure for the Thorne family. And justice, however delayed it might be." The question of justice was complicated in this case. Rebecca Miller and the others had been minors at the time, their crime one of terrible judgment, panic, and subsequent deception rather than intentional harm. The statute of limitations on most potential charges had long expired, though the DA was reviewing possibilities for charges related to the cover-up. Michael Thorne presented another complexity. He had committed a serious felony in abducting Ethan, yet his terminal diagnosis and the extraordinary circumstances made conventional prosecution seem both pointless and unduly harsh. He remained under hospital arrest while the legal system struggled to find an appropriate response to his actions. And then there was Ethan, a child caught in the ripples of events set in motion before his birth, traumatized by an abduction meant not to harm him, but to force a long-buried truth into the light. "How is the boy doing?" Winters asked, echoing Olivia's thoughts. "Remarkably well, all things considered," she replied. "Children have an astonishing capacity for resilience when given honest explanations and proper support. His therapist says he's processing what happened in a surprisingly healthy way, and the parents." Olivia sighed, turning to look back toward the Ranger vehicles where Rebecca and David Miller waited. "This kind of revelation fractures foundations," she said after a moment. "Rebecca built her adult identity on carefully buried secrets. Now she has to reconstruct herself around newly exposed truths. That's not a simple process." "And her husband. Finding out your partner has hidden something this significant has to be devastating." "It is," Olivia agreed. "But there's a kind of liberation in it too. David told me yesterday that for years he'd sensed a wall around part of his wife, a piece of her he couldn't quite reach. Now he understands why it was there." They watched in silence as the recovery team continued their methodical work, piecing together evidence of a tragedy long obscured by youth, fear, and the human instinct for self-preservation. "You know what strikes me most about all this?" Olivia said finally. "How a single moment, one poor decision, one accident, one lie, can ripple outward through decades, touching lives that didn't even exist when it occurred." Winters nodded thoughtfully. Ethan's abduction might never have happened if those teenagers had simply told the truth 20 years ago. And yet, Olivia countered, Rebecca might never have become an advocate for victims, might never have done the good work she's accomplished, without the subconscious drive to atone for what happened here. A complicated equation, Winters acknowledged. Human lives usually are, Olivia replied, turning as one of the rangers called her name. Complex systems of light and shadow, neither entirely good nor entirely bad. The paradox of Rebecca Miller continued to fascinate Olivia as the investigation progressed. Here was a woman who had dedicated her adult life to helping others, who had raised a compassionate, well-adjusted son, who was by all accounts a loving wife and valued community member. And yet, at the core of this admirable life lay a terrible deception, a moment of youthful cowardice that had shaped everything that followed. Michael Thorne presented a similar paradox, a man driven by genuine grief and the legitimate pursuit of truth, yet willing to terrorize an innocent child to achieve his ends. His methods were unequivocally wrong, yet his motivation, the desire for his daughter's story to be accurately told and remembered, was profoundly human and understandable. As dusk settled over Widow's Creek, casting long shadows across ground that had held secrets for 2 decades, Olivia found herself contemplating the nature of truth itself. Some argued that truth was always healing, always necessary, but the reality seemed more nuanced. Truth could heal and harm simultaneously. It could liberate and devastate in the same moment. It could close old wounds while opening new ones. The only certainty was that once revealed, truth could never again be buried, not completely, not forever. It remained present, a foundational reality upon which new understandings must be built. For the Miller family, for Michael Thorne, and for the memory of Lily Thorne, that rebuilding process was just beginning. Chapter 6, Reconstruction. 6 months after what the local media had termed the Widow's Creek revelation, Rebecca Miller sat in the visitors area of the hospice facility, watching Michael Thorne through the window of his room. His deterioration had been rapid since his arrest and subsequent release into medical custody, the cancer consuming his already lean frame with merciless efficiency. "Are you sure you want to do this?" David asked quietly, his hand steady on her shoulder. "No one would blame you if you didn't." Rebecca covered his hand with her own, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm sure," she replied. "It's time." The hospice nurse nodded to them as they entered Thorne's room. The formerly imposing man now appeared diminished against the white hospital linens, his skin translucent, cheekbones sharp beneath skin stretched too tight. But his eyes remained alert, brightening with recognition as Rebecca approached. "You came," he said simply, his voice a raspy shadow of itself. "Yes," Rebecca replied, settling into the chair beside his bed, while David positioned himself at the window, close enough to provide support but giving them space for what needed to be said. I hoped we could talk. Really talk, not like at the fire tower." Thorne studied her face for a long moment. "You look like her sometimes," he observed. "Something in the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. She used to do that too." Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at this small, precise memory of her childhood friend. "I didn't realize that," she said softly. "There's so much about Lily I've tried not to remember because it hurt too much, because of the guilt." "Tell me something you do remember," Thorne requested, his gaze intent despite his physical weakness, "something good." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to access memories she'd kept walled away for so long. She could memorize song lyrics after hearing them just once, she said, smiling slightly. "We'd be driving somewhere, a new song would come on the radio, and by the second chorus, she'd be singing along perfectly. It used to amaze me." "She got that from her mother," Thorne replied, a ghost of a smile crossing his gaunt features. "Catherine was the same way. Sometimes they'd have entire conversations using only song lyrics. It drove me crazy, but they thought it was hilarious." The mention of Lily's mother, who had died of breast cancer when Lily was only 10, created a moment of shared understanding between them. Both had lost someone irreplaceable, both knew the particular ache that never fully subsided. "Michael," Rebecca began cautiously, "I need you to know how deeply sorry I am, not just for what happened to Lily, but for the cover-up afterward, for the years you spent wondering, for taking the truth from you, when it was the only thing that might have provided some closure." "I know," he said simply. "Do you?" she pressed, needing him to understand the depth of her remorse. We were young and terrified, but that's not an excuse. What I did was unforgivable. Thorne was quiet for a long moment, his labored breathing the only sound in the room. For many years, he finally said, I believed exactly that it was unforgivable. I built my life around the absence of forgiveness, around the certainty of my own righteousness in my grief and anger. He paused, gathering strength to continue. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've faced the consequences, how you've refused to hide from the truth even when it would have been easier, how you've reached out to help others impacted by what happened. I've come to understand something I didn't expect to learn at the end of my life. What's that? Rebecca asked, leaning closer to hear his weakening voice. That forgiveness isn't something we earn through perfect atonement. It's something we discover is already there, waiting for us when we're ready to accept it. He reached out with a trembling hand, and Rebecca took it gently in her own. I forgive you, Rebecca, not because what happened doesn't matter, it will always matter, but because holding onto bitterness has been a prison for us both. The words broke something open inside Rebecca, a dam of emotion she'd been holding back since the day at the fire tower. Silent tears streamed down her face as 2 decades of guilt, shame and fear began to drain away, not eliminated but somehow transformed by the simple profound gift of forgiveness. Thank you, she whispered, unable to find more adequate words. They sat in companionable silence, for several minutes, the weight of their shared history somehow lighter between them now. When Thorne spoke again, his voice was fainter but surprisingly peaceful. I need to ask you for something, he said. Anything, Rebecca replied immediately. Tell Ethan the whole truth when he's old enough to understand it, Thorne requested. About Lily, about what happened at the creek, about why I took him. Don't let him grow up with half-truths or gentle lies meant to protect him. Rebecca nodded, understanding the importance of this request from a man who had spent 20 years searching for truth. I promise, she said softly. And I'll make sure he knows about Lily, who she was, not just how she died. That her life mattered, not just her death. Thorne's eyes filled with tears at this unexpected gift. She would have been remarkable, he said, his voice breaking. She had such light in her. She was already remarkable, Rebecca assured him. And she is remembered, Michael. She will continue to be remembered. Before they left, Rebecca placed a small envelope on Thorne's bedside table. These are from Ethan, she explained. He wanted me to give them to you. After they departed, Thorne opened the envelope with shaking hands to find several carefully drawn pictures, a young boy's artistic interpretation of a dark-haired girl standing beneath trees, beside a creek, surrounded by woodland creatures. At the bottom of each drawing, in a child's careful printing, were the words for Lily Thorne, who loved the forest. Michael Thorne died 3 weeks later, with Rebecca at his bedside reading poetry that Lily had loved, her voice steady as she accompanied him on his final journey. He was buried beside his daughter and wife in a small cemetery overlooking Blackwater Forest, under a headstone that read simply, Seeker of Truth, Finder of Peace. Chapter 7. The spaces between stars. 10 years passed, seasons turning in their ancient rhythm, changing the forest and the people who walked beneath its canopy. Ethan Miller, now 16, stood at the edge of Widow's Creek, watching sunlight dance across the rushing water that had played such a pivotal role in his family's story. This is where it happened, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Rebecca nodded, standing beside her son with a mixture of sadness and pride. He had grown tall in recent years, already surpassing her height, his features settling into a handsome combination of her analytical expression and David's steady presence. Right there, she confirmed, pointing to the large boulder midstream. That's where Lily was standing when she fell. Ethan knelt to pick up a smooth stone from the creek bed, turning it over in his hands thoughtfully. And this is where you decided to lie about what happened, he said, not accusingly, but with the directness that characterized his approach to difficult topics. Yes, Rebecca acknowledged. One of the worst decisions of my life, made in a moment of panic and shame, and one that had consequences I couldn't possibly have imagined at the time. True to her promise to Michael Thorne, Rebecca had gradually shared the complete story with Ethan as he grew older, answering his questions honestly no matter how painful. The abduction that had once been explained in simplified terms appropriate for a young child, had evolved into a complex narrative about truth, responsibility, and the enduring impact of our choices. I've been thinking about Michael a lot lately, Ethan said, skipping the stone across the creek's surface, about what it must have been like for him, living all those years with unanswered questions about his daughter. It was a particular kind of torment, Rebecca replied softly, one I contributed to, and one I regret more deeply than I can express. Ethan nodded, his expression contemplative. But if he hadn't taken me, if he hadn't forced you to face what happened here, you might never have found the courage to tell the truth, and Lily's story might have remained buried forever. The insight struck Rebecca with its simple wisdom. Her son had developed a remarkable capacity for seeing the complex interplay of human actions and motivations, for finding meaning in the spaces between apparent opposites. That's true, she acknowledged. Though it doesn't justify what he did, it does help explain it. Human beings are capable of terrible mistakes for understandable reasons. Like you were, Ethan observed, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. Like I was, she agreed. And like you will be in your own way. We all make mistakes, Ethan. The question is what we do afterward, whether we hide from them or face them, whether we learn from them or repeat them. They walked slowly along the creek's edge, following its winding path through the forest. In the decades since the truth about Lily Thorne's death had emerged, much had changed. Rebecca had helped establish a foundation in Lily's name, providing wilderness safety education and support for families who had lost children in outdoor accidents. The annual Memorial Scholarship funded several students each year who shared Lily's passion for environmental conservation. More personally, Rebecca had found that Michael Thorne's forgiveness had opened a door to self-forgiveness, not an immediate transformation, but a gradual process of accepting her flawed humanity and channeling her remorse into meaningful action, rather than self-punishment. Mom, Ethan said, after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, I've been thinking about the Memorial Scholarship. What about it? Rebecca asked, curious about the serious note in his voice. I want to apply for it next year, he replied, stopping to face her directly. I know it might seem strange, given our family's connection to the foundation, but I've been working on an ecological research proposal with my biology teacher. It's about watersheds and conservation, exactly the kind of work Lily was interested in. Rebecca studied her son's face, seeing the earnestness there, the genuine desire to connect with and honor a girl he had never met, but whose story had shaped his life in profound ways. I think that would be perfect, she said softly. Lily would have liked you, I think. You have her curiosity, her way of seeing connections between things. Do you think Michael would have approved? Ethan asked, vulnerability evident in the question. Rebecca smiled, remembering the man who had taken her son in desperate grief, but returned him with unexpected grace. Yes, she said confidently. He would have seen it as the closing of a circle, life continuing, beauty emerging from ashes. As evening settled over Blackwater Forest, painting the trees in hues of gold and amber, Rebecca and Ethan made their way back toward the visitor center, where David waited. The path they walked was the same one Rebecca had run along in terror 25 years earlier, a 15-year-old girl fleeing from a terrible accident that would echo through decades. Now she walked it at a measured pace, accompanied by the son whose own journey had been irrevocably affected by choices made before his birth. You know, Ethan said thoughtfully, as the visitor center came into view, I've been reading about quantum entanglement, how particles that interact become connected in such a way that the state of one instantly influences the other, no matter how far apart they are. Rebecca smiled at the seemingly abrupt change of subject, accustomed to her son's mind making connections that weren't immediately obvious. And how does that relate to what we've been discussing? She asked. I was thinking about how lives become entangled in the same way, he explained. You and Lily, you and Michael, me and all of you, each of us influencing the others across time and space in ways we can't fully comprehend. The observation struck Rebecca with its profound simplicity. That's a beautiful way of thinking about it, she said. And it suggests that connections never truly break, even after death. Ethan nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. Like stars, he said. Even after they die, their light continues traveling through space, touching worlds they'll never know. As they approached the visitor center, David came out to meet them, his smile warm in the fading light. Looking at her husband and son, the family that had survived unimaginable challenges, Rebecca felt a sense of peace that had been decades in the making. The truth about what happened at Widow's Creek had been painful, its emergence traumatic, but from that truth had come healing, not just for Rebecca, but for Michael Thorne, for Lily's memory, and ultimately for Ethan, who had grown up in the light of honesty, rather than the shadow of secrets. Some wounds never fully healed, some questions would never have satisfying answers. But standing there, with her family whole and moving forward, Rebecca understood something fundamental about redemption. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the scars didn't exist. It was about building a future worthy of those who had suffered, about transforming pain into purpose and deception into truth. As night fell over Blackwater Forest, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, distant lights spanning unimaginable distances to touch the earth below. Rebecca gazed up at them, thinking of Lily Thorne and Michael Thorne, of the 15-year-old girl she had once been, of the woman she had become through both terrible mistakes and genuine atonement. Their stories were entangled now, quantum connections spanning decades and generations, each influencing the others in ways both seen and unseen. And in the spaces between those entangled stars, Rebecca had finally found the courage to stand in her complete truth, not perfect, not unblemished, but authentic and at last at peace. If this story of buried truths, painful revelations, and hard-won redemption touched your heart, please subscribe to the Lost and the Found channel. Share your thoughts in the comments about how facing difficult truths in your own life has led to unexpected healing. Remember that even our most painful stories deserve to be honestly told, for it is often in our most vulnerable truths that we discover our greatest strength.